There are over 25 million naturalized citizens in the United States. What if I told you that under a new DOJ memo, every single one of them is at risk for having their citizenship taken away? Hardworking Americans, taxpayers, many of whom have served in the military, having their citizenship just stripped away years after becoming naturalized citizens. That's not some dystopian future. That's actually happening right now. And we're going to talk today about how that's possible under our favorite president, Donald J. Trump. I'm Shant Karnikian. That's Brian Kabateck. This is Civil Action on the Legal AF Network. Brian, let's talk about the law on this.
Yeah, there's an awful lot here to explain and to kind of unpack, so to speak. First of all, denaturalization, which is what it's called, is legal in limited circumstances. So the first requirement is that you have to be a naturalized citizen. You weren't born here. We're not talking about the 14th Amendment. We're not even talking about birthright citizenship today. We're simply talking about somebody who was not born in this country but became a citizen, applied for citizenship, and became a citizen. Now, it's true. There is a process in a law, federal law, called denaturalization, which is where they're stripped of their citizenship. But that law has been used sparingly over the last century or so, particularly with like Nazi war criminals who lie their way into the country using a false name and false background and fail to disclose their participation. It's also been used for people who have been convicted of serious crimes in another country and failed to disclose that information and somehow weasel their way into citizenship. But what we're talking about now is using it and expanding it for people we simply don't agree with. And Sean, it's not the first time that this has happened in the history of the United States. There's been a couple of dark chapters where this has been rolled out in the past.
Right. I think this was used during the McCarthy era, where folks that didn't disclose that they're communists had their citizenship revoked. And I think that's a very dark era, like you said, Brian, and I think that's ridiculous. And where do we draw this line? I mean, is the Trump DOJ going to go after and try to denaturalize citizens who didn't disclose that they are Democrats? Or are they going to go back and review records and say, well, you're a Democrat, so we made a mistake, or whoever granted you citizenship made a mistake? I mean, I know that's kind of funny, but it's not funny. It's not a joke. That's a slippery slope, I know, but where do you draw that line is what I'd be worried about. Right now, this DOJ memo says that they're going to prioritize revoking citizenship from naturalized citizens who commit serious crimes or had obtained citizenship through fraud or non-disclosure. I understand that, and that's not necessarily morally repugnant in and of itself, but where do you draw the line? And the revoking of citizenship for people who commit serious crimes, even that I frankly disagree with, because once you become a U.S. citizen, you're a U.S. citizen. You can be punished. I'm not saying these people shouldn't be punished if they're, engage in terrorism, sex offenses, things like that. They should absolutely be punished by the American system as citizens, as just like how any other citizen, naturalized or not, would get punished under law. I don't think they should have their citizenship taken away, because it leads to pretty absurd results if you keep going in this direction, right?
Well, let's first of all start with the notion that somebody's beliefs or somebody's opinions, whether they existed before or after they became a U.S. citizen, are potentially constitutionally protected under the First Amendment, right? And so, we've said this before, that the U.S. Constitution applies to people whether they're citizens or not, whether they're here legally or whether they're undocumented, it doesn't matter. It applies. So simply because of the belief in your head doesn't give the government the right to revoke your citizenship because you're pro-Israel or pro-Palestine or pro-Ukraine or pro-Russia or whatever the whim is of the administration in Washington. I think that's an important point. I think another important procedural point here, Shant, is that someone might think that this is a criminal proceeding, and it's not. It's a civil proceeding.
And I think the big important distinction between a civil and criminal proceedings, Brian?
Well, there are two significant distinctions. First of all, you have no right to an attorney. So imagine that you are a naturalized U.S. citizen. You're making, an average wage. You don't have very much money. And suddenly the Trump administration decides that because you supported a cause that they didn't like, they're going to revoke your citizenship. They take you to civil court. Now you have to hire a lawyer out of your own pocket to defend you. The other important point, and this is rather nuanced, but I think it's really important to understand, is that in criminal court, the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. In civil court, it's a much lower standard. It may be a preponderance of the evidence or clear and convincing evidence. It's a much lower standard than reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
You have the weight, Shant, of the federal government, of Pam Bondi and Donald Trump against you, and they want you out of this country. I mean, look no further than what's happened with some of these people in the news recently, what they have and they're up against.
Yeah, and that standard or the fact that this is a civil process is problematic. There's certain protections that don't apply in the civil process, and it's a big deal. I mean, let's not forget about the insignificance of not having a right to a lawyer there. In a criminal process, if you get charged with the most heinous crime and you can be the most destitute person in this country, and the Constitution affords that person a lawyer. And why? It's not because criminals are great people and we need to give them pro bono legal advice. It's because that's how the system works. It's an adversarial process. So that protection, the having a lawyer afforded to you or given to you if you can't afford one, is an important protection. Our system works.
Especially, Shant, when you have the weight of the federal government coming down on you.
Yeah.
That's the reason why, is that how are you supposed to be able to mount a defense if you don't have the ability to hire a competent, decent lawyer to at least try to defend you in court while they're trying to revoke your citizenship? Now, just to make the situation even more dire, a lot of times people renounce their citizenship of another country. So literally, if the government's successful because they don't like your views and they take away your U.S. citizenship, you may become a man or a woman without a country.
Yeah, you become a stateless person. And I mean, your whole life can fall apart. And the implications of something like this are huge. You know, you get people being targeted for political beliefs and social beliefs or things like sexual preference, things that they can't even help. They can't even, these aren't even choices that they made. And you have a problem there. And I think, you know, you have the constitutionality and due process problems we talked about. You have kind of like the political targeting problems and the weaponizing of this. And then I also think you have the bigger, the consequences of this attitude. Once this becomes okay, you know, where do we draw the line? I think this goes back to something I find myself talking about on every one of these episodes that we do, that this is just an attempt to push boundaries, shift the window so much that things that we otherwise found morally reprehensible or repugnant become okay because it's not as bad as these other crazier things that are being done. And I think that's there's got to be a deliberate effort behind this. This is thought out. This is not happenstance. This is not just gut reaction. I mean, there's a plan. There's a bigger picture here. And I think democracy is at stake.
Right. Well, I'll give you my final thoughts on this, Shant, which are pretty simple. We go back to the McCarthy era in the 50s. No, I wasn't a young lawyer practicing law back then, despite the fact that you think I'm elderly. Then we had people swearing loyalty oaths. We had people renouncing their belief in communism and whatever the issues may be. What we're facing today is not just that, but more, which is the use of fear as a weapon of the Trump administration and of Donald Trump personally. You have to bend the knee. You have to kiss the ring. And if you're not the right kind of people, we're going to find the way to throw you out of this country, because we're going to manipulate the thought in this country of how we look at people, what kind of a country we are. And this law and the misuse of this law, which I predict they will have a mighty struggle in the courts upholding, but they may turn in the process many, many people's lives upside down. This law is unjust and unfair, but it's just another example of the tyranny of this administration and its misuse of the legal system. So those are my final thoughts. Shant, as usual, you get the last word.
Well, I think this is not about immigration or immigration policy. This is bigger than that. This is about what kind of country we are, what kind of country we want to be, and who gets to belong here. And I think democracy is at stake. I think people's lives are at stake here. And it's a lot bigger than what it seems to be. I'm Shant Karnikian, Brian Kabateck. This is Civil Action on the Legal AF Network. Thanks for tuning in. Like and subscribe and follow us, and let us know if you have any questions. Love to see your comments. Thanks a lot.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.